Hello, podcast listeners. We are reposting this episode. So if you've already listened to episode 10 and loved it, great. But we tweaked the audio a little bit because we got some feedback about the balance being way off. And also, that photo of the flower beetle got us an ID. Dr. Allison Bain, who had joined us on a previous episode talking about the role of insect remains in archaeology and what we can learn about how humans lived based on the bugs that we find in archaeological digs where people lived. She identified that beetle as, I'm trying to pronounce this right, Oryzophilus mercator, which is the merchant grain beetle, and it isn't even in the same family as the flower beetles we were looking at. So we were really way off base, but still small. I guess to the untrained eye, similar looking beetle, but the serrated edges on the pronotum, which is like this shield that beetles kind of have on their thorax, is very distinctive for the merchant grain beetle rather than the flower beetles. We'll post a picture of our dead little beetle on Twitter and Facebook. And again, thanks to Allison Bain for helping us with the ID. So please enjoy episode 10 if you haven't heard it yet, or if you didn't like the audio the first time, you can listen to it again. Thanks.
In 2013, there's a weasel stolen the sausage from a supermarket, and because the CCTV and monitoring the whole area, so that weasel is on TV.
You are listening to Urban Wildlife Podcast.
To set the scene, we are on top of the roof of Gigi's in my house in West Philly. It is a twin, but very close together with other houses, so it kind of looks like a bunch of row houses. And so in the interior of the block, there's little yards, little gardens, which ours, for perspective, is 20 feet by 8 feet. These are not big, with a tiny alleyway running between them. And the houses are sort of like 2.5 stories, or like 2-story houses with like the third story occupying like half of the footprint of the house. And so in the back, you can go up on the roof of the top of the second story through a window on the third story. So that's where we're chilling right now. Keep an eye out for bats. Also, it's a really pleasant place to sit and talk. Welcome back to another episode of the Urban Wildlife Podcast. This is your co-host, Billy Brown, with
Tony Crowsdale.
Bull Gervasi.
And Bull. How do you know Tony?
Tony and I have been BFFs for a good 20 years now.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
We met through the punk scene. We played in a band together.
We worked. Well, really, our friendship blossomed because we worked
at the Wooden Shoe bookstore.
The anarchist bookstore.
Yep.
Well, we knew each other from around the scene. Bull was already a legend.
Bull,
you're what, 3 years older than me? 2.5.
2.5.
So, but like when you're 18,
21-year-old's a big deal.
Yeah, well, especially because Bull. But the thing about Bull is he has an older brother who looks. Bull looks younger than his age by 10 years, and he has a young. Bull's brother seriously looks like he's 28, even though he's like 44, 45. He seriously, I'm not even joking. He looks no older than 30. No exaggeration. I don't think he can grow a beard, although Bull can grow 5 beards.
Yeah, Bull's got a good.
But he still has a babe. He still has a very. Bull's extremely handsome. I say that, but a lot of people. Bull's like ridiculously handsome.
Bull's that hot guy who works at the co-op.
Yeah. Yeah. So you guys were like got into punk young, and your brother got into punk young, and then got you into punk even younger. So even though he's a couple years older than me, punk-wise, he was like 5 or 8 years older than me. He's going to shows in the late 80s.
Yeah, we started in, I think he went to his first show in 86 and I went to mine in 87.
Yeah, so I didn't go to my first show until 92, so.
Yeah.
5 years. And 5 years is like huge in punk, you know?
Definitely. not that old to begin with.
Yeah, especially then.
Yeah.
Bull's a legend. He was in 2/3 bands already before he was in my band.
And Bull is also a birder. Did you get into that before Tony or through Tony?
Birding through Tony. I was always interested in nature and kind of thought of myself as a naturalist, but through touring with Tony and traveling all over the world, seeing interesting birds, that really, actually looking through Tony's binoculars was the game changer for me.
And I brought extra just for that.
Yeah, that's really what sold me on it, was actually being able to see birds close up in a way that I never had before. And from there, it's just blown up. Now we're even closer than ever.
It's amazing to say that, but it is absolutely true.
Awesome. So we are. I'll do the usual introduction stuff.
Real quick, I will say this.
Yeah.
When you are in a band, it is very similar to being in a romantic relationship.
Yes, with 4 or so people.
And one of the ways that romantic relationships stay viable is if you have common interests with your partner. And Bull and I have managed, because of like the band and like traveling around the world, so yeah, you could say Bull got into nature and got into birds because of me, but because my bandmates were into nature, I was able to arrange like excursions on tour. So like, let's be very clear that like they were into nature themselves, which enabled me to be like a bit more intentional about where we went to see birds. So so it was definitely like a feedback loop that we had, but
A virtuous cycle.
Rather than getting drunk and sleeping late the next day, we would get up early and go for a hike.
Yeah.
Or go swimming or snorkeling or...
So Bull and I have managed to like, when you're in a band, you feel like your bandmates are like family, forever, whether or not you like them. But A, I liked all my bandmates; they're already, my friends, and B, we get to share this hobby forever. We're always. It's not just birds. We go to the Pine Barrens, look for Pine Barrens tree frogs. Quonk, 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 quonk. We go to bogs and look at rare plants, and we just like, hey, there's a cool spot. Let's go check it out, see what's there. Like, that's awesome.
Go with Billy to look for turtles.
Yeah.
And look for rattlesnakes. And
oh yeah.
Bull's good luck. He found me a black rat snake on the trip we went up together. Not to mention some chicken of the woods, which was really good.
It sounds like, I don't remember that, so it sounds like a trip that I wasn't even on.
You were totally there.
You were there.
You were there, and you were upset because I hadn't told you about all the briars, and you had worn shorts. And so we were like wading through.
Wait, where's the black rat snake?
The black rat snake was on this mountain slope that was on the way to see some rattlesnakes.
Oh, okay. I forgot about the black rat snake. It was overshadowed by how many rattlesnakes did we see?
We saw a bunch of rattlesnakes, but we also, I just remember.
And a ringneck.
We flipped a ringneck. I was like, it doesn't happen that often, but I was like, this is the kind of rock you flip a ringneck snake under. And sure enough, right there was a ringneck snake. It's fun when that happens.
If people hear static, it's because it's my bat. Well, it is the bat detector that I'm using.
Maybe let's turn it off until we actually do see some bats. I was more confident than I maybe should have been. I have seen bats on this roof, and I will include that little clip of me talking about the bats when Gigi and I saw them.
They're back.
And they're back. Oop, there they go again. Neat. They're totally digging it. Well, they're digging our bugs. They're not digging us.
They don't give a crap about us.
They don't give a crap about us. You're welcome. No. For providing a home for your moths and beetles that you are now munching out of the air. Just go behind you.
No,
Go in between the houses. Okay, neat.
They keep coming over the roof, though.
They keep coming over the roof and then like flitting between the sets of twins. And they, at first, like my brain was like, oh, there's more swifts, but they're not making any noise and they're fluttery as hell. Yeah. So we got bats. Neat. I wasn't sure. Congratulations. One more observation. Some dickhead below has a bug zapper we keep hearing go snap, and we were complaining about it a minute ago because I think we all know by now those don't actually kill mosquitoes. They just kill everything else. Every one of those little zaps is potential food for the bats that they're not getting
because some dickhead is indiscriminately killing all the other bugs.
It
but-
is actually not my bat detector. It is property of the city of Philadelphia.
So don't drop it. All
Right.
right.
However, the thing is that this gets me more efficient in the use of it for my public programs.
You're practicing.
I
This
am.
is professional development.
It is indeed.
So, with that, we'll do our usual stuff. We'll say, hey, if you like us, please tell all your friends about the podcast on whatever medium, vocal, text, you name it. You can snap it, whatever you want to do. WhatsApp, whatever. Let people know about how much you love this podcast. You can tell other people about the podcast also by liking it on Stitcher or iTunes, whatever your podcasting platform is. Rate us, please, and leave us some feedback. You can tweet at us at UrbWildlifeCast and email us at urbanwildlifecast@gmail.com and tell us about ideas for a podcast episode or stories. You can also, with your very own phone or other recording device, you can make a recording of a little something where you are, you describing it, what you're looking at, what have you, and we would love to include that as some
Wildlife bling.
on a future episode. We're actually running kind of low on wildlife bling. I got like one thing about geckos in San Salvador in the hopper, and after that we're out of wildlife bling. So we really need some wildlife bling. And once again, we're recording on my roof, so you're going to hear some of the street noises of West Philadelphia, far off sirens, maybe a Mr. Softy truck going by, which happens at weird hours at night. But we want to hear from you, and if you got ideas for longer pieces, you just drop us a note. We'll work that out. We love. Look, we have thought of a certain amount of stuff on our own, but we know that you out there, if you're liking an urban wildlife podcast, you probably like urban wildlife in general, and you can probably find some urban wildlife right where you are that we and your fellow listeners around the world will want to hear about.
Hey, podcast listeners. Earlier in the evening, before we went on the roof, we tried to identify some flower beetles.
Podcast listeners might remember that when we did our interview with Allison Bain, the archaeologist who studies arthropod remains, to learn about how people lived. When we were talking, I had just before interviewing her thrown away a whole bunch of beetle-infested flour, which once I talked to her, I realized was stupid. I should have saved some of that flour to ID the beetles. And then when I talked to my parents recently, my parents had some infested cornmeal. So I was like, wait, don't throw it away! So we're going to try to ID these flower beetles in this sample of my parents' infested cornmeal. We've got Bull. Say hi.
Hello.
Bull's manning the USB microscope I've got. The thing is, we haven't actually killed these things yet, and they run fast as soon as they see that light on them. But we got a dead one on its side, so we're going to look at that. There are two species that I think it might be either a red flower beetle or a confused flower beetle, named because it is easy to be confused with the red flower beetle. Apparently, what you're looking at is the shape of the antenna, or the antennae. Antenna, which is plural?
Antennae, I believe.
Okay. At least one antenna per beetle, and how the sort of segments on the ends of the beetle, of the antenna look. So the red flower beetle has 3 clubs at the end of each antenna. We're looking at that one. I don't see like...
We got a visitor.
Yeah, another beetle looks like it's humping the dead one. Or just crawling over it. So
Coleoptera necrophilia.
And so now I'm going to look at the confused flower beetle, which has like... Here.
The antennae.
That's confused.
The antennae on these look really much longer.
Yeah. That
Do
one
we have
was
a
short.
different kind of flower beetle entirely?
Back to... I look at my beetle book at work.
Let me get a little spoon, try to fish it out. Alright, so Bull has extracted the dead flower beetle. We're going to put it under our microscope.
Alright.
Yes, I think these are flower. I think these are fused.
So these are tiny. These are just like, how do we compare this? This is smaller than a grain of rice. So from time to time in the podcast, we're going to post us trying to identify something.
we have a recorded bit of me and Tony trying to identify a couple species of fall asters, which I'm going to edit down into basically a comedic short.
Can you please have yakety sax played in the background?
What's yakety sax?
Benny Hill's theme?
Yeah. We probably should. Yeah, I don't see like a major set of 3 clubs or something. But admittedly, these flower beetle, this looks like confused, but it is, the antennae look longer than the ones in these pictures. So we can't tell what kind of flower beetles these are. I'll have to shop around some pictures.
Synanthropic organism.
We're going to start with a discussion of flying foxes in Australia. I guess everywhere from Middle East through. Do they have flying foxes in Africa?
I believe so.
And through Asia,
I think they're,
Australia,
throughout the tropical old world.
Yeah, but not the New World. So we're kind of jealous. We don't have your fruit bats, and so we want to hear about those fruit bats. And here we go. And for reference, in a previous episode at the cemetery, at the Woodland Cemetery, this is the species that Tony saw while making out with a
punk lady in Brisbane, Australia.
Well, my name is Marie Treadwell Kerr. I'm a member of the Australasian Bat Society. I coordinate a program called Australasian Bat Night, which happens every March and April. And I'm also a co-convener of the Australasian Bat Society's Flying Fox Subcommittee. And I got involved in flying foxes when I was living in Sydney, and I read a story about them. This is back in 1985, about the flying foxes. At that stage, there was just one colony in Sydney in the northern suburbs. And I read about it in the local paper, and then there was this group setting themselves up to conserve them. Flying foxes, or fruit bats, which is another name for them, are a large bat. They're essentially a tropical animal, but they're not found in the Americas at all. They differ from the microbats, as well as in size, in that they're vegetarian. They eat nectar and pollen and fruits, and they're very important for pollinating plants and for dispersing seeds. There's about over 1,300 species of bats in the world, and there's about just over 100 species of flying foxes. And in Australia, on the mainland, we have 4 flying fox species: little red flying foxes, spectacled flying foxes, black flying foxes, and grey-headed flying foxes. And they're found in different parts of Australia. 2 of our mainland flying fox species are threatened. That's the grey-headed flying fox, which has its core habitat exactly where people live on the east coast of Australia, and the spectacled flying fox, which is found in a very tiny place up where I live right now in the tropics, in far north Queensland. Its population has reduced by about 60% in the last 10 years.
So if you were a flying fox, why would you want to set up camp in Sydney or Melbourne or any other city?
Well, basically, the main flying fox habitat in Australia is either the tropical north or the east coast of Australia, and all of our major cities are there, and all of our flying foxes, or most of the flying fox habitat, is there as well. But in recent years, the bats have been becoming more urbanised and have been staying all year round, or some of them have been staying all year round in our cities. And the reason for that has got to be to do with food and the reliability of food. In our gardens in the cities, both backyards and in our public gardens, the plants get watered regularly. Therefore, they might be a little bit more reliable in their providing food for the flying foxes, especially at times of year where there can be shortages of food. Australian climates are pretty erratic. Our eucalypts, which are their main diets, are just as erratic when they flower or when they don't flower, and So for a flying fox, staying in a city is a more reliable source of food. They're nomadic animals, and the numbers vary depending on how much food is around.
So you mentioned them sort of appearing in Sydney, and now they seem to be in several cities. This sounds like is this a relatively recent phenomenon of urban flying foxes?
True, they're new to Adelaide, which is a city on the south coast of Australia, a little bit to the west, but not that far to the west. And there used to only be occasional visitors there. But they've been in Melbourne for over 100 years, but they haven't had a big group until fairly recently that was there all year round. Some of this is to do with climate change too. We used to think that in winter they moved away because it was cold, but the grey-headed flying fox doesn't seem to mind the cold. They hung around in Canberra in winters, getting down to -7. We tested to see whether it was a little bit warmer where they were than the rest of Canberra, but it was just as cold.
So when flying foxes roost, I guess what is a camp? What does it look like? Is it inconspicuous? Is it totally conspicuous? What is it like?
It's generally conspicuous. It depends on the numbers that are there. A small camp, people may not notice they're there at all. Sometimes in Canberra, I've quite enjoyed watching people walking. They're in a public park where there's a lot of events held in Canberra called Commonwealth Park. And I've enjoyed watching the people walking up and down coming to an event and then suddenly realise, hey, there's bats in these trees. But when there is a big group of them, they can get a lot noisier and things too, so that it's easy to tell that they're there. If you live close by to a flying fox camp, you may be impacted by them coming into your backyard as they emerge if you live right close. And so then you have droppings. And flying foxes, because they only eat a liquid diet, so when they're eating fruit, they chew the fruit up, drink the juice, and spit the rest out. So there's spat outs plus droppings. And that can be a bit messy. They also mark their territories with scent glands. So that's especially prominent in the mating season, which is for 3 of the flying foxes is autumn. And that is a smell that a lot of men don't like in particular, but some women do. It can be quite strong, so that if you're living quite close to that, the smell at that time of year can be a bit strong. Flying foxes, if there's a big group of them, they're social animals. They make lots of noises. They've got, about 50 different communication noises, and they like to talk. So they can be noisy, but they'll be noisy at different parts of the day. Generally, the quietest time, if you're living near a flying fox camp, is at night time when they've gone out to feed. And this is where they turn up in people's yards, other people's yards, to eat the nectar from their eucalypt trees or to eat fruit from their fruit trees, native fruits and sometimes domestic fruit.
Okay. And when we talk about a camp, I mean, how many flying foxes, are we talking about?
Oh, it varies. And it varies depending on what amount of food there is around. So there could only be, a couple of hundred flying foxes or even less. And the numbers can build up to, 100,000 at times if there's lots of food around, and depends on the species as well. We used to have in Brisbane in the 1960s, there used to be 5 major campsites. Now there's something like about 50, but they're smaller numbers inside each camp. And we think this is because they're trying to feed closer to the smaller camps, so they save energy. And that's the same thing in Sydney too. When I lived there, when I first moved there was 1 major camp, and then they moved to the Botanic Garden, so there were 2 camps, and then we found another one at Cabramatta Creek, and now there's about 5 or 6 or 7, and they may not all be used at the one time.
So when I was looking into this, I found articles about botanic gardens sort of trying to evict their camps. I guess how have different cities around Australia dealt with the camps? I mean, I guess ranging from peaceful coexistence to looking at them as pests.
Yeah. And that's can be a bit of a time question too, because as I was saying, when I was in Sydney, when we discovered the third camp, it instantly became a flying fox reserve. These days, when they discover a new camp, they want to move them away immediately. So there's differences in political time, and that's in the same city. In the botanic gardens, the big botanic gardens in Sydney and Melbourne, they were where they were actually roosting was on some very valuable palm and fern areas, and some of these trees have got historical significance, and some of them are trees that aren't around in their own native places any longer. So that's why they moved them. In Melbourne, they identified a whole lot of other areas, and they moved them along a corridor, just nudging them, trying to get them to the area that the people thought was the best area for them. The flying foxes stopped at what the people thought was number 2, and they stopped there and they stayed there.
Like, how do you get them to move?
Well, most attempts actually don't work. What they do, because the flying foxes fly out at night and then they come back again in the morning, what they try to do is disturb them before they settle down for the day. So the flying fox is tired, it wants to roost, wants to rest for the day, and somebody's making all this noise, and it's usually noise that's stopping them from being able to settle down. So they move somewhere else. You really don't have that much control over where they can go. So what they did in Melbourne was where if they went somewhere they didn't want them to, they kept the noise up there, and until they moved to somewhere where they wanted them to go, and they had to move bit by bit by bit until they got there, which took lots of days, lots of time. And in Sydney, they didn't send them in any particular place. They thought if they made enough noise at the Sydney Botanic Gardens, they'd move to one of the other camps nearby, which they did. But they still have to make sure that, especially when it's coming up to birthing season, that they make enough noise that the flying foxes don't settle in the Botanic Gardens. And that's years afterwards. So it's a very expensive exercise. And there's been a review looking into the different attempts at dispersal in different places. And most of them have failed. Every single one of them cost a lot of money, and it also takes a lot of time and resources.
Talk about sort of, I guess, a transition from viewing them as an obstacle and looking at them as a tourist or educational opportunity.
Yeah, and that's what they're doing here in Cairns now. They've tried the last few years to move them, and without any success. So now they've decided to turn this around. They know that the tourists love them. So we've started a new management plan to look after them, which involves a lot of community education and community engagement to try and change some of the negative attitudes to people, to make them see them more positive.
Tony, how excited you are now to go check out some flying fox camps?
Well, I mean, I saw them in we saw them in the Melbourne Botanic Gardens, didn't we?
I remember seeing them on one of the drives somewhere between Melbourne and Sydney. I don't recall the Botanic Gardens though.
I believe we were taken specifically to Melbourne Botanic Gardens to see the flying foxes.
Oh yeah.
Bull's not known for his memory.
This touches on some themes that we think about, like that come up with a lot of other animals. Like when we talk about sort of, there's the commensals, there's the stuff that like lives with humans wherever we go, like house mice and flower beetles. But then which the flower beetles are a synanthropic organism of the episode, in case that wasn't clear already.
And are you saying house mice, like, so you're saying like, and how do you control them in your house? Not your house, but other people's houses?
With mouse traps?
Or an inside cat?
A cat only inside, hunting that mouse.
Yes.
they're those kind of critters, or pigeons, or what have you, that follow us wherever we go, or take some plants like dandelions, or plantain, or
Burdock.
Burdock. I was gonna say ailanthus on this block. But then there are the wild, what we think of as the wild animals, local wild animals that find something useful in a city for them, like a resource that they like. And so here we've got flying foxes that like the regular, reliable food source of urban trees, and sort of, this is, thank you for putting these lovely fruit trees and eucalyptus trees in your city. We think we'll stay, and you see those parallels in anywhere you are. I mean, you've got that, and we'll listen to a couple other stories in a minute about that sort of thing. But in Philadelphia, man, we don't have the flying foxes, but we got, I don't know, think of possums or raccoons. We in our first season, we were talking about coyotes in Atlanta, Georgia, including coyotes that would stand up on their hind legs to get the figs out of fig trees in people's gardens. So, there's another frugivorous mammal, albeit not flying, that likes our gardens and likes the lovely fruit trees that we plant for them. And so, Tony, I look forward to you doing we got some nice recordings on this episode of flying fox. We have Marie Kerr from the Australasian Bat Society talking about them, but also that recording of a camp of flying foxes. And so you'll get out there and see some flying fox camps.
Yeah, I will return.
Sure, I'm Seth Magley. I'm the director of the Urban Wildlife Institute at the Lincoln Park Zoo. We keep one toe in that prairie dog research world because they're incredibly interesting, and we actually published a paper just a few years ago looking at human-coyote conflict data in Denver, and then also looking at the distribution of prairie dogs. And what we found was that there are fewer conflicts between humans and coyotes in areas where there are prairie dogs. The logic being that the coyotes are more likely to predate the prairie dogs and less likely to go after pets, for example. So I think that that's a pretty cool story that kind of gives us a sense of how managing an urban area like an ecosystem and sort of thinking about the needs of these different species can actually help reduce conflict with humans.
So then some quick background on the prairie dogs. I guess for me, maybe this is my East Coast bias, but I'm having trouble picturing where you have prairie dogs in urban settings. Can you describe are we talking about a vacant lot that happens to have prairie dogs? Are they in parks? Where do you see prairie dogs in Denver, let's say?
Yeah, the majority of my research colonies were on private land on vacant lots. So you're sort of right on there. But there actually are some urban parks that do have prairie dogs. In some cases, just because the prairie dogs have sort of moved in and people don't really know what to do about them. And in others, because they actively manage for the prairie dogs. So that does happen. I mean, so you'll see them all sorts of places where they can be a nuisance, where there are species that people are actively trying to remove or control. But then in other places, you'll see people actively managing them to sort of try to keep them around and sort of to increase their population. So they're an incredibly interesting species politically as well as biologically because they're very divisive. People love them or they hate them. They have no legal protection, so they are frequently just killed by developers and people who want to use that land for other purposes. But then at the same time, we know they're keystone species in the prairie ecosystem. They hugely increase diversity where they live. So they really are a species that's sort of emblematic of our sometimes conflicted attitude towards wildlife in cities.
How do they disperse within cities? I mean, I think of them as a small animal that might be challenged by major roads. I mean, do they manage to I guess, cross roads well? I mean, or do they?
Yeah.
How do they? Go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, the short answer is we don't know how they do it, but they do. So I never really caught them at it, but I did genetic studies of these colonies that were incredibly isolated, like a colony where there'll be no other colony for 3 or 4 miles, and it's just nothing but major roads and sort of human development. But the genetics taught us that there were several first-generation migrants, sort of new immigrants into that colony. So somehow they are making it between these sites in urban areas. Also, I thought it was kind of interesting, we detected no inbreeding, even in the most isolated, most urban colonies. So there is some kind of ability to move between them. I don't know exactly how they do it. I know that I see them dead on the road, so they're obviously not perfect at it, but they must just have some kind of ability to get around roads, find the little underpasses, find the little culverts, whatever they need to find to get between these colonies. But yeah, it's really pretty remarkable that they are able to do it, because you're right. You look at them and you think, oh, there's no way you guys can move across this urban matrix, but they do manage it.
So something else that I should have asked a minute ago that I might move earlier in your discussion of prairie dogs, but why would people dislike prairie dogs? I mean, I think I can think of sort of rancher conflicts, but that's just me assuming it. Why do people? I mean, why wouldn't you like a prairie dog? They seem cute.
Yeah, I think that the main reason in urban areas people don't like them is that they dig up landscaping. So they go after that Kentucky bluegrass, they dig their burrows, they sort of rip it up. I know golf courses just hate them because they move into that very closely manicured turf grass and they just make a huge mess of it. They also do get plague, and people have concerns about contracting plague from prairie dogs, which is actually very difficult to do because you have to get their fleas on you. But unless you're handling dead ones, you're very unlikely to get plague from a prairie dog. But people worry about that, or they worry that their dogs will run out and play with a dead prairie dog and end up with plague and bring it back home, things like that. But a lot of it is also historically, and historically really it was the ranchers who really disliked the prairie dogs because they saw them as competing with their cattle for forage. So there were just campaigns for, decades and centuries to try to eradicate these prairie dogs to try to help the cattle industry. And a lot of that attitude sort of is still prevailing.
So prairie dogs, guys.
They're cute.
Yeah. I'm a big fan.
Yep.
I wish I had them in my city, but we don't live in prairies.
We don't, but this tempts me. I don't know if someone's doing it. Maybe if you are and you wanted to call in, please let us know. I'm kind of curious about, because I've been wondering about how groundhogs disperse. Like, we know that they like to live along roads. If you're not used to driving around eastern North America, you'll see dead groundhog. You'll see live groundhogs on the side of the highway, like almost anywhere you go. They love that like wide grassy
median,
and then the margins of the highways. And then, of course, you'll see them dead on the road, too. They wander out and they get hit by cars. But in Philly, we see them definitely along railroad lines, but I'll see them in places where they're like, I don't know how the hell that groundhog got there. Like,
yeah.
Like there's this big vacant lot. There isn't a railroad line nearby. It's like, I guess there's other yards and stuff here and there around it, but it's mostly like row houses without much grass around. And I'll still see like that one vacant, like one big like vacant lot, like that's like a quarter of a block or something that size. And I'll still see that like one groundhog chilling, like waddling around eating stuff. And I'm like, how did you get here? And so this is aside from just the wow factor of like urban prairie dogs, because they're prairie dogs. They're not like city dogs. Like they're animals. You ask people about prairie dogs who know anything about them, they'll talk about like them living out on the Great Plains and giant colonies, and like one of the things you think of along with like, I don't know, American bison.
The like, grasslands are like some of the most altered and degraded habitat in North America.
So if they can persist there and feed some black-footed ferrets in the wild areas, they can also
vertiginous hawks.
And they can apparently do well in cities too.
Some gopher snakes.
And gophers, yep. So we'll keep an eye on our own local ground squirrels, our groundhogs, and maybe think more of prairie dogs.
One of our 5 sciurids.
One of our 5 sciurids.
Sciurids.
I thought so too until someone else we interviewed about Project Squirrel also out of Chicago. We'll post a link to that. That he had pronounced it sciurids. So ever since then I felt corrected. We've got chipmunks, another ground squirrel. We've got groundhogs. We have red squirrels and gray squirrels and southern flying squirrels in Philadelphia. So we have more sciurids than you thought, huh? All right, so we're going to wind up with a short listen about the Siberian weasels of Beijing's hutongs.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for listening to this wonderful program. My name is Zhu Lei. I come from China, and now I'm doing something like freelance ornithologist, and also guided the foreigner birders around China to do the bird watching. So I lived in Beijing for altogether 7 years.
My name is Jeremy Goldkorn. I lived in Beijing for 20 years, from 1995 until last year. And I lived all over the place in Beijing, many different places, but spent quite a lot of time right in the historic heart of the city. And I am an amateur wildlife enthusiast. I have been since I grew up in South Africa, where we used to go on safari. We don't call it that, but, to go and see wild animals. So wild animals have always fascinated me. And Beijing is not a city one normally associates with wild animals. Most people first think of pollution and a population of 20 million. But there's a rather amazing range of wildlife, both in the city and in the nearby countryside. Well, I should sort of explain about the heart of Beijing, which is where I've seen the most wildlife.
Sure.
It's a historic city center. I mean, what's left of it. There are still some historic areas left, and they are narrow alleyways, which are called hutongs. And the houses in such areas, the old houses, are typically a Chinese courtyard house. So there's little gardens essentially inside the courtyards. So in the hutongs you see quite an amazing variety of insects, kind of odd-looking sort of cockroachy type of bugs, centipedes and millipedes. And then I think my favorite animal sighting is what the Chinese call huangshulang, which is a Siberian weasel. And these animals have long been thought of as good luck by Beijingers.
Basically, Siberian weasel is a weasel. It belongs to a family of the weasel, badger, and ferret. But the Siberian weasel is some sort of, just judging by the size, is a little bit similar with your martens. So actually, it's a weasel, but it's quite a big one.
It's very difficult to see them because they move really fast, and often what you see is just a flash of yellow running across the alleyway, and that's supposed to be lucky. I think the only time I saw anything more than a flash of yellow was there was one time when there was one on the roof of a courtyard house that I was staying in, and I was sitting in the courtyard, being very quiet, reading a book, and I saw it up on the roof, and it was just lurking up there, looking around, and the whole sighting must have lasted about 15 seconds, which was certainly, the best sighting I had.
According to the literatures, I think basically they feed on the rodents, rats, mice. Sometimes they can catch bird, I think. Unlike other wild animals, those Siberian weasel in China, they've been protected more or less by superstitions, which means people think the Siberian weasel is an animal with some sort of a magic. If you hurt them, you will be cursed. And those animals, they can even, especially in Beijing, people believe that the Siberian weasel can control one's spirit. Wow. So that animal is being protected. No one hurt them on purpose. Because those hutong is disappearing, so the weasel is losing their habitat. And because now it's more heavier traffic, they have a higher probability being hit by the car or other vehicles.
Well, unfortunately, very bad and short-sighted urban planning has, since the beginning of China's sort of economic opening up in the late 70s and early 80s, resulted in huge swathes of the hutongs, of the courtyard houses, just being destroyed and replaced with very boring buildings that not only don't have any traditional Chinese character, but also have completely ruined what was a really unique downtown area where you could be, and there's still a few of them left, a few areas, but you can be in a hutong and it feels almost like the countryside. They're very narrow, so they're not very good for cars. So they tended to be very quiet. And because of all these courtyards, you have trees inside the courtyards, and it was almost like this little piece of countryside right in the middle of a big city. But yeah, very sadly, very bad urban planning has destroyed a lot of that.
And I did some research through the internet about Siberian weasel in Beijing, especially. I found some interesting news, such as in 2013, there's a weasel stolen the sausage from a supermarket, and because the CCTV and monitoring the whole area, so that weasel is on TV.
I had a weasel first in Philadelphia recently.
Where'd you see weasel?
There was a skunk in the backyard of the co-op a few months ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you see it alive?
Yeah. It was alive and it left.
All right.
Went down 49th Street.
Was it daytime or nighttime?
It was daytime.
Yeah. Next time that happens, you got to whip out your phone and record a little note for Wildlife Bling.
Will do.
But I smelled a skunk on. We're trying to get. We'll link to this. There's a young one. There's an artist who is doing a kind of I don't know how to categorize it, but a project called Skunkadelphia, where she's like raising awareness about skunks in general and like urban wildlife, but also like taking pictures with a little stuffed skunk around the city, and so we thought that was pretty cool. So we'll show some of that. But it was like a few months ago. We were out on our porch, and here in West, like not too far from the co-op, really. We're probably like 10 blocks from the co-op tops.
Yeah.
And I was coming out in the morning and I smelled a skunk. And like Tony's made this observation sometimes. Tony, about skunk smells in the city.
Oh, it's like, is that a skunk or is that some dank weed?
Right. So sometimes you're not sure if someone's smoking weed or if you're just smelling some really, as Tony said, strong weed, or whether it's an actual skunk. And so this time it was like no mistaking it. It was definitely a skunk. And I sort of looked up and I was like talking to Magnolia. I was like, "That's a skunk." And like a dude walking by on the sidewalk looks up at us. He's like, "You're right. I smelled the same thing." And so there's a skunk hanging around. We haven't smelled it since. So maybe it was a transient skunk, and it's taken up residence behind the co-op, where I'm sure it gets a lot better trash behind the co-op.
For the record, there are no skunks in our backyard
Anymore.
ever.
Oh, okay. So
there was once a passing skunk.
There was another. There was a transient skunk.
Transient.
Sorry, would never want to imply that the co-op has permanent skunks. So, we're going to wrap up. We're going to say again that if you like this podcast, please make sure you tell everyone you know how amazing it is and that they should listen. If you like the podcast, please rate us highly on Stitcher and iTunes. That'll help more people find us, and that'll just improve their lives measurably. So you can improve a lot of lives and help a lot of people by liking us on iTunes and Stitcher. For getting in touch with us, you can email us at urbanwildlifecast@gmail.com. You can hit us up on Twitter at urbwildlifecast. Find us on Facebook. And you can just tell us about what you think of the podcast and make suggestions. But you could also record something. You can send us a file, or you can call us and leave a voicemail at 267-603-3219. Again, 267-603-3219. And Tony, why ever would someone want to call us?
For some Wildlife Bling.
You want to describe it this time?
So, yeah, Wildlife Bling is, we have a hotline, right? and you can call us up on that hotline and talk about your wildlife observations, be it black kites flying over Hong Kong, capybaras in Curitiba, could be
skunks in Skunkadelphia.
Yeah, skunks in Skunkadelphia. Could be, just insects in your house, geckos behind your headboard. You never know what cool stuff you see in a city that is awesome. Or it could be like something crazy, like you live in Churchill, Manitoba, and there's belugas in your river. Granted, it's not really cities, only 100 people live there, but you know what I'm saying. There's stuff like that happens.
Sometimes there's a beluga in the Delaware River.
Yeah.
So it happens. So yeah, drop us a line. You can also record a file on your phone and pop that to us by email, or drop us a note by some other means, and we can figure out a file transfer for it. And if you got another idea for a longer kind of project, we want to hear it. I know I regularly accost people on the internet and tell them and beg them for content. So please let us know what you got. Coming up, I got some people from Singapore to write me back, and so we're working on some Singapore civets stuff in our series of mesopredators released.
We should do something about mesopredators in Mesoamerica.
Hey, my name is Caitlin Dunnigan. I recently went to El Salvador, and while I was there, I found a little ectothermic friend. So the first time I saw the common house gecko, also known as Hemidactylus frenatus, I didn't really know what species it was. All I knew that it was a gecko, and it had been pointed out to me by a fellow group member that had seen something scurrying up the side of the wall, and they just asked me to take a look at what it was, and whenever I saw it, it was not one, but two geckos that were about the length of a number 2 pencil, and they were tucked away in the corner of the wall. Now, I wasn't really too surprised to see these geckos at the hotel we were staying at, because it was removed from the city's traffic, and the hotel lights provided a good amount of food for them. However, the next time I saw the gecko, I was a little bit more shocked. The group I was with happened to be building for locals in San Salvador, which is the capital of El Salvador, and the part that we were in was specifically called Old San Salvador to the locals, and poverty is much higher here, as well as litter, unclean water, and pollution. So when we lifted up a piece of plywood and there was a gecko that was almost as small as a penny just hanging out looking up at us, we were all a little confused as to how it got there. But after talking with a couple locals, herpetology friends, and then doing some research on my own to find the species of the gecko, I learned that it was actually invasive to El Salvador, and apparently a common place for them to lay their eggs is on construction equipment, which explains how the gecko found its way to us in the middle of a bustling city. Common house geckos are originally from Southeast Asia and were brought in to El Salvador to deal with agricultural issues the country was having at the time. The environmental impacts of the common house gecko in Central America is poorly documented, but because they're thriving even in cities, people are a little worried about the long-term effects that their presence will have on other native species.
You also don't lose the story, so who tongues don't say nothing whip. Who tongues don't say nothing whip.